Good afternoon to everyone in the eastern half of the country, and to those in the west, good morning. Welcome to this very special telephone town hall with the legendary Michael Enright. My name is Daniel Bernhard. I'm the executive director of the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and we are thrilled, positively thrilled, to be hosting this event for you, our supporters, so you can put Michael in the interview seat for a change and put your questions to him. Thank you to everybody who are now joining us from across the country. I'll bring Michael on the line in just a few minutes. We'll wait for a few more people to join us. And while we do that, I'd like to bring you up to speed on Friends' latest activities. As you know, Friends is the citizens' champion even, for Canadian culture and democracy, with a special emphasis on building a strong, vibrant, and fully independent CBC. We've been at this work for some 35 years now, but I have to say the next few months are some of the most consequential that we have ever faced. There's a new Broadcasting Act before Parliament for the first time since 1991. I'm afraid to say it has some major flaws, and Friends is working tirelessly on your behalf to fix the problems with the Broadcasting Act in service of Canada's cultural sovereignty. We're also pushing for the CBC to become less commercially focused and to ensure that its digital content is freely available to everyone. This is especially important given recent news of Tandem, which you may have heard of, a plan by CBC management to sell sponsored content, which is basically secret advertising that looks and feels like normal CBC content, but is actually bought and paid for by corporations. You may have seen that more than 400 current and former CBC journalists and executives, including Peter Mansbridge and Adrienne Clarkson, and 2 former CBC presidents, have called on CBC management to reverse course, and Friends is supporting them every step of the way. So that's the latest from Friends, and if you'd like to learn more about what we're up to, I encourage you to visit us at friends.ca, where you can see everything you need to about our campaigns and sign up for our mailing list if you'd like to stay in touch. If you're just joining us, welcome. We are about to start our telephone town hall with Michael Enright. This telephone town hall is live and interactive, and so if you have a question for Michael, here's what you need to do. Please press *3 on your phone. An operator will take your question and put you in the queue. You will still be able to hear the town hall while you're waiting to ask your question, and when I call your name, you'll be able to ask your question to Michael live on the air. I can see that the phone lines are already buzzing, but just before I bring Michael in, I'd like to ask you, the people listening at home, to answer a quick question that can help us to guide this discussion. And so our question is, what are you most interested in hearing Michael Enright talk about today? Press 1 on your phone if you'd like to hear Michael talk about his early years at the CBC. Press 2 for Michael's opinions on the state of journalism and democracy. Or press 3 for Michael's views on the future of public broadcasting. I'll say that again. Please press 1 on your phone if you would like to hear Michael talk about his early years at CBC. You can press 2 for Michael's opinions on the state of journalism and democracy, or press 3 for Michael's views on the future of public broadcasting. Okay, this is exciting. We have a few thousand people already in the town hall, and there are still a number of callers getting connected, and we'll be taking your questions live in just a couple of minutes. But before we get to the first question from callers, let me welcome our special guest, Michael Enright, who really does require no introduction. But I would like to clarify one thing. Michael has graciously agreed to participate in this telephone town hall, but he is not a representative of the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. He's not here speaking on our behalf. And Michael is also here in his personal capacity, not representing the CBC itself. And so I would just like to be very clear about this. Michael has generously given us his personal time, but he is not representing the CBC, nor is he a representative of Friends. And so with all of that cleared up, Michael, it is a pleasure to spend one more Sunday with you, perhaps not on the radio, but on the phone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Daniel, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Very kind of you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. When you announced in the summer that you were leaving the Sunday edition, were you at all surprised by the outpouring of love that you received from Canadians?
I guess after 20 years on the same program, I shouldn't be surprised about anything. But what was very moving was the tenor of the emails and the letters I got. Pardon me. Very warm, very intimate, very proprietary in the sense that the listeners owned the program, and it belonged to them as much as to me, and it was quite gratifying. I still haven't come down from the outpouring, but it was really amazing.
Well, I know that friend supporters were part of that outpouring of love. I believe over 700 of them sent you letters of thanks, and I got to read a couple of them, and they were really fantastic. Michael, before we get to the phones here, we're waiting for more people to connect. I'd like to start off with a question of my own, if you like. Our theme for today is the future of public broadcasting, but if you may, I'd like to ask you about the past. When you first joined the CBC, many people thought it had lost its way. Barbara Frum called the CBC radio of that era, a, quote, ponderous university of the air that talked down to people and was patronizingly intellectual. But CBC Radio rebounded, launching compelling new programs like As It Happens in 1968 and then ditching advertising early in the 1970s. It seems like your early years at the CBC were really a period of innovation and rejuvenation. Can you tell us a little bit about the spirit of the place at that time?
I think a lot of people had become, both within and outside the CBC, had become very comfortable with the old way of broadcasting. Along came two people named Ward and Meggs in the middle and late 1960 to do a report to give a sense of what the current situation was with CBC Radio and what the future was. And I think at the time a lot of people said, "What's the point? There's a lethargy. It's stale. It's old-fashioned radio." But these two guys looked at every aspect of CBC Radio, and the report that they came up with, I think, set the stage for the future successful development of CBC Radio. And then there were people like the late Margaret Lyons, a former vice president, and various presidents of the corporation who really wanted to resuscitate CBC Radio because it really was, since its invention, something that did bind the country together. And as you say, As It Happens, Sunday Morning, a different way of looking at CBC Radio. And the way it was done, they brought in a bunch of young kids like Mark Starowitz and myself, and who really didn't know a heck of a lot about radio, but knew a bit about journalism, and had the energy and I guess the arrogance to think that we could make a difference. So the mood was upbeat in those years.
That's extremely fascinating, and I think hopefully something that we can touch upon again as we look to the future. Reinvention is a constant necessity, and so I think people will be very curious about what comes next. Thank you to everyone who has just joined us. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask Michael a question, please press *3 on your phone. We will try to get as many of your questions answered as possible, so I ask that out of consideration for others that you please be brief. And I believe that we are ready to take our first call. We have a call from Gavin in Regina, who would like to know about how the CBC can be more meaningful for people who are living outside of Toronto. So, Gavin, over to you. What is your question for Michael?
Yeah, just said to the other gal, more of a comment than a question, really, but I keep hearing from people that are longtime CBC listeners that they're kind of frustrated by the fact that so much content seems to be sort of Toronto-centric or aimed at Southern Ontario or maybe the arts community in and around Toronto, and it doesn't have a lot of day-to-day resonance with people out west or here. I'm in Regina, for example, and I don't know how you correct that or how you address it, and maybe it's something that's happened over time, maybe it's deliberate, maybe it's inadvertent, I don't know, but does Michael have any thoughts as to how to maybe rejuvenate the CBC sort of more cross-country? I'll leave it with you.
Well, Gavin, I think it's important to understand there are two elements. Well, there are more than two, but two major elements in CBC Radio. One is we are a network, but we are also local and regionally based. I've spent every summer for the last 20 years in Newfoundland for a few weeks, and I can tell you that CBC Radio is absolutely crucial to the communities on the island of Newfoundland and in Labrador. I think one of the things that management is trying to do is to strengthen our regional and local presence, because it is so critically important, given the fact that a lot of community newspapers have withered and died, and really CBC Local is how people find out what's going on in their community. And I think a lot of it has to do with money, but then of course everything involving the CBC has to do with money. But I think it's important that we who live in the bubble try to understand or try to get to know how communities function outside of Toronto. It's a bit like living in Washington, I think, because we really don't know the country as well as the people who are in the regions. I can't tell you an awful lot about Regina. I've been there many times, but we need to have a presence, a local presence, and a regional provincial presence in those areas, and we have to strengthen them, because I think they're needed now more than ever. Is that
yes. Thank you so much, Michael, for that, and thank you, Gavin, for your question. We have another question now from Aldo in Montreal. Aldo would like to ask about the general role of the CBC in contributing to the arts. And I know, Michael, the arts are a point of great importance for you, and your show is punctuated with beautiful music. Aldo, the line is yours. Please ask your question for Michael.
Yes, thank you. Michael, my question is a question and comment. First of all, I want to mention that I'm forever grateful that we do have a CBC here in this country, and which was once cross-country, coast to coast. It actually put Canada on the map. Besides Pierre Trudeau, when he came up with the Juno, with Mr. Juno, the Canadian content idea, I think that was a whole revelation which changed the future for Canada. Now Canada owns practically the music world. Unfortunately, with consequent governments, they've demolished the idea. But it's really important for this to stay together, not only to promote what Canadian artists, Canadian culture, and also that sense of community in the various parts of the country. I'm a musician, have traveled a lot around the world, but in the beginning, most of it was in Canada. We see the importance of ourselves promoting and promoting to each other and seeing what we are doing, not necessarily always facing south. We do have a lot of great talent. And now the other issue, which is new in the new world, is the attack on arts, on the composition, on the creativity and the creators. Meaning, because there are less and less record sales per se, the broadcast of Canadian music and art and content is more important, because the streaming now. The companies make billions of dollars, but the artists, as we all know, make pennies. And
Aldo, could you bring us to a question, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, I needed to preface that. But what is the CBC addressing that content and making it national for the streaming to be, income streams to be more important to Canadian artists?
The CBC has always been referred to as the largest and most important cultural institution in the country, and I think it's fair to say that were there no CBC, we'd be inundated with American programming. You never would have heard of Glenn Gould or Maureen Forrester, and I'm not sure that the Stratford Festival would have gotten off the ground. It's very important to understand that the mandate of the corporation is to enlighten, inform, and entertain. So arts have always been and will continue to be, I think, very at the top or near the top of a priority list of what the CBC does. It can be very expensive programming. Doing live concerts, for example, Doug Campbell used to do live ballet performances. That has not happened in the last 5-10 years, sadly. But there is definitely an energy and an appetite, pardon me, among management and producers and executive producers, both television and radio, to keep in mind that we are a cultural institution in our journalism, in our formatting, in streaming, in all of the platforms and so on. If we ever lost sight of that, I'm not sure what our mission would be. But again, we have to realize that these things, they cost money, they cost airtime, they cost talent, but without focusing on the arts and without maintaining a connection, a nexus with the artistic community and the people coming up, I think this country would be in very bad shape. There would be a poverty in terms of arts, because young people, young musicians, young performers, young rock and roll rappers, whatever, they get a start on CBC radio. And I think that will continue, I hope.
Michael, can I ask you a follow-up question on that? You know, we often hear people, you know, who are concerned about CBC music, for example, that there's not enough classical music or too much classical music. That choice in some ways is not available because there's only, you know, really, you know, one music station. What do you think about this? About the sort of changing tastes and the way that, you know, CBC adjusts to it? It's impossible to please everybody, of course, but you have played a wide variety of music on your program and seemingly to positive reviews. How do you try to manage that balance of the new and the old when it comes to music?
Well, if you try to please everybody, you wind up pleasing nobody. I have certain musical tastes. I was very lucky in having producers who were involved in music, both in the broadcasting of it and in the understanding of it. To have someone like Robert Harris, for example, as a functioning part of the program, I think that we can't try to do everything. That's one of the problems, I think, with CBC, is that we are expected to do absolutely everything and do it in 2 official languages and many more languages up north. I think that the people who are programming music are doing it with the sense that they are reaching out to various audiences and various demographics. It's not true that young people only care about rock and roll or rap or hip hop or whatever. They do care about classical music and jazz. I think that there's a lot of work that goes on in the music department, or what is left of the music department, that is trying to create an environment, a landscape of varying different kinds of music. We have an awful lot of music on right now. People don't seem to realize that. Rhythm and blues, classical, jazz, whatever. I think what I'd like to see is a little more emphasis on Canadian composition, particularly recent music, new music with which I am not familiar and would like to learn along with the audience. So we have to keep trying.
That's fantastic. I'd like to bring in another caller here, but before I do, I'd just like to announce the results of our poll. We asked you what you would like to hear Michael talk about, and I can say that the resounding winner is to hear about Michael's views on the future of public broadcasting. So I will try to steer the conversation in that direction, and I know Michael will do his best to oblige the audience as he always had. And always will. And speaking of the future of public broadcasting, I'd like to ask a question here. We have Claudia from London who would like to ask about the future of Michael's broadcasting career. Claudia, I think you're curious to see if there's anybody that Michael would like to interview. Claudia, the question is over to you.
Hi there. Thank you. It's such an honor to meet you on the radio, Mr. Enright.
Thank you.
You've been a real constant in my life over many years. And my question is a personal rather than a general one. And that is there somebody you haven't interviewed and who you would like to interview, and what would you talk to them about?
That is so hard to answer. I've interviewed hundreds, maybe thousands of people. A lot of them, sadly, are dead now. I guess, of course, I'd love to interview the Pope. As a recovering Catholic, I have some questions I'd like to put to him. I've interviewed a Queen Noor of Jordan. I think I'd like interviewing writers and poets, because they are so important in the fabric of our culture, and it's they have insights that the rest of us are not open to, are not privy to. I would love to interview George Clooney for different reasons. Someone who looks like that. Obviously, the questioning would be pertinent and intimate, I would hope. Politicians, I don't know. I've interviewed so many of them, people like Boris Johnson, and I find that they are so media savvy that it's extremely hard to break through the message track. I like talking to just people, folks. I'd love to interview a glass blower, for example. I don't know how they do what they do, but I'd like interviewing people who can educate me along with the audience. I don't want to learn an awful lot about cost accounting or life insurance, but I like learning along with the listener. And I'd like to interview Dolly Parton. What can I tell you? We did a wonderful piece on Ms. Parton with Robert Harris a couple of seasons ago, and she is now coming back, if she ever went away, as an amazing woman and an amazing performer. But I'll have to make a list for you, Claudia, and maybe get back to you about who I'd like to interview.
Thanks, Michael, and my apologies to all the insurance brokers and accountants out there.
They are all wonderful people, Daniel.
If you are a glass blower, you know where to call. We have an online question from Anita Roberts-Lewis. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. About misinformation and what can be done to fight misinformation. And how CBC can counter or exist in a world with the Facebooks and Twitter going on. And I'd also like to just pair that, actually, if I may, with a question over the phone from Barbara, who asks about whether the crisis in the U.S. is affected by a lack of public broadcasting. This seems to speak to, Michael, your sense of curiosity and openness to other views and perspectives, and how that allows us to relate to each other. So, Barbara, the line is yours. Please, if you could put your question to Michael.
Thank you very much. This is a real honor, and I must tell Michael that I followed his entire career on CBC. In fact, I started with Pat Patterson, I think, in the 50s.
Oh.
So, thank you. I travel often to the States, and although I do listen to NPR, National Public Broadcasting, it is not like the CBC or the BBC, and I do wonder what the impact is of no national independent public broadcasting system in the United States. Could this possibly be related to the current democratic crisis that they're in?
I think it could be. I'm not sure how central it is to the current democratic crisis, as you put it. There has always been misinformation in any kind of journalism. You just have to go back and look at the famous photograph of Harry Truman in 1948 holding up a copy of the Chicago Tribune saying Dewey beats Truman. The thing about the United States, and I lived there, I went to school there for a while, Americans seem to distrust anything emanating from the central government, except when they have to trust it. In other words, they're against socialism, but they're very much in favor of farm subsidies. They're against socialism, but they're very much in favor of Medicare and Medicaid. I think the NPR does a heroic job, and the Center for Public Broadcasting, but I don't think there's a cohesive view of journalism nationally in the U.S. And then you have newspapers such as the Washington Post and the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, which are excellent in terms of conveying the best truth given the available information. And I can tell you that the journalists and the journalistic leaders at CBC are working incredibly hard to make sure that we do not send out information that is wrong-headed or wrong or propaganda. They work really, really hard. They put me to shame, actually, making sure that the journalism we do is up to a certain standard, and those standards are pretty darn rigid. I think the current crisis in the U.S. stems from the fact that Americans don't know whom they can trust anymore. They can't trust the government. They can't trust the police. They can't trust the post office. They can't trust their institutions. I don't think that's a result of having the absence of a national public broadcaster, but I think a national public broadcaster would help people understand their civics and their politics and how they view their citizenship, not just as consumers, but citizens. And Americans individually have always been strong on that question of citizenship and banding together. Unfortunately, though, the last 4 years have destroyed that matrix, or at least weakened it. But public broadcasting, to me, is central to so many things at the moment. And we can talk about that later if you want. But NPR, I think, does a great job, and it's a worthy attempt to do what the CBC does every day.
That's I think a really widely shared sentiment, not just among Friends supporters, but among Canadians in general. In fact, we regularly conduct public opinion polls asking people about which journalistic outlets they trust, and CBC regularly ranks atop the list. However, we do have a couple of questions here about trust, and NPR in the U.S. and PBS as well have become politicized to some extent. And there are some concerns in some quarters, and definitely in my eyes, that the CBC is also becoming a bit politicized. Not political in itself, but is being used in political ways, and that trust is starting to fray or to fragment in some cases. And we have an online question here from Brian asking what you believe the best way is for the CBC to defend against political attacks on fact-based journalism. And we also have a similar question from Paula in Fredericton, who is on the phone. And so maybe, Paula, you can expand upon Brian's question. The line is yours. Please go ahead and ask your question to Michael.
Okay, thank you very much. Certainly a CBC radio fan. Mike, I'm curious about what are the reasons that those who oppose funding to CBC steady and ongoing, like from my own perspective, for example, like Sundays, my favorite day for the program, starting with the weekend morning out of Halifax with Bill Roach, the program that you just left, spirituality, book reviews, and during the week ideas. I mean, I've worked with Stephen Lewis Foundation and Help Lesotho ever since I heard the Massey lectures on radio. I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do in this group, but I know that I'm going to volunteer for something. And it has taken a fair bit of my days in my 60s, 70s. Anyway, just curious, do you have a list of sensible reasons why they don't want to fund CBC?
I don't know how sensible the reasons are, but any government agency, we are a Crown Corporation, but any agency that is involved with subsidies from the government or policies laid down by various institutions is bound to be political in some way. What CBC is not is partisan, and there's a difference. You can always tell because every party in this country has some scorching criticisms about the way we go about our mission, our work. I think a lot of people are concerned that, as an earlier caller said this afternoon, that we're too Toronto-oriented. We're too, we live in a bubble. We don't understand the country. There's also a lot of concern that the radio service is populated by radical left-wing crazies who are trying to impose some kind of socialism or proto-socialism on the country, that we do not pay enough attention or respect to other opinions or right-wing opinions or whatever. I always tell people, just remember that Canada is, in its political DNA, is roughly center-left. Yeah, the pendulum swings back and forth, but that has traditionally been the way we Canadians have situated ourselves. And I think the CBC is reflective of that. A lot of people don't like us because of the money. It's $1 billion a year, which is a hell of a lot of money, of taxpayer money. And they feel that they're not getting their taxpayer money worth. Although we are very low in terms of public financing of public radio compared to other countries. I think we rank somewhere around Burkina Faso or something in terms of, it costs Canadians about $30 a year to support everything we do. It's something that we're always on the alert for, and I don't think we respond to our critics more forcibly enough. I think we should get out there and sell the message of public broadcasting and sell the message of the CBC. We've got a terrific product, and we should really push it. But I can understand how people can get a little fed up with some of the sameness, perhaps in the schedule or some of the political things. I know a lot of people got fed up with me, and that is very important, that they have a right, and I would suggest a duty, to criticize people who are on the radio and criticize public CBC programming. But it's something that is always on our minds, and it's very hard to answer. I think if the CBC did not exist, I think it might be impossible to invent it now, but I think a lot of people would be very, very upset at its absence.
Well, I can say, Michael, I don't know about Burkina Faso, but you're right. The last time we checked, funding for public broadcasting in Canada was about $33 per person per year, which was the third lowest among developed countries. New Zealand, I believe, was slightly below us, and then the United States below that, which has no publicly funded public broadcaster. So we're definitely close to the bottom. And as you mentioned, unlike the BBC, for example, which is mostly in one time zone and mostly in one language, CBC is English, French, radio, TV, digital, and the Northern Service as well. And so the obligations are many. Speaking of the Northern Service and getting as far away from Toronto as we possibly can, We have a question from David in Whitehorse about how CBC can help to build a more inclusive country. David, what's your question for Michael?
My question for Michael is, what does he think CBC could do to try to help build a more inclusive community in Canada? New Zealand now has a very inclusive community and are world leaders. They changed their electoral system to a proportional, mixed member proportional system back in 1996, and now they function as a community. It's much easier to govern when people feel they belong. And I guess my question is, how could CBC help Canada to look at its electoral system and make a change in its electoral system?
First of all, Whitehorse is one of my favorite places in the world. I just love it. I don't think there's one issue or one area that is more intensely studied, thought about, worked at than the whole question of inclusivity. It really is a day-to-day involvement and emphasis by producers, by management, by everybody, that we have to, as a national broadcaster, with emphasis on national, to get more people involved, people of all kinds, all different kinds. I know that for years, the CBC didn't look like the country. Now we're getting on to that. We are starting to look like the country. You're starting to hear accents on the radio. You're starting to hear people from different countries, different cultures, different political viewpoints being interviewed. Whether the electoral system is a way of doing it, I don't know. I've always been a first past the post kind of guy. I'm not sure about proportional representation, that it would allow, you would wind up with numerous parties and perhaps deadlock, or perhaps something that you have in Israel. But I do know that there is an intense effort to reach out to communities. I think we're the only broadcaster in the country that regularly deals with issues involving Indigenous people. The whole question of, for example, the whole question of drinking water on reserves, which is a national scandal, has been picked up by programs, almost every CBC radio program, and it turned it into a kind of cause. People say that you can't solve a problem by throwing money at it. Well, yes, you can. You can provide clear and clean drinking water and sewage facilities by building them, for God's sake. And I think that that's where our energies should be placed. We should also get into the high schools. We should also get into the community colleges and find people who perhaps don't look like us, or don't look like me, or don't look like the president, and foster a kind of what to me is so important is that people understand that they own the CBC, and they have to become involved with it. And we, on the other hand, have to reach out to these people. And I must say, we're doing it. There's a hell of a lot of energy being expended in that cause, in that mission. And I think it will. You'll start to. We already have started. You'll hear a difference on radio, and you'll see a difference on television. And we just have to keep it up and keep doing more and more of it.
That's a heartening message, and I think leads very well into our next question. But before I put the next caller through, I'd just like to remind those of you who are just joining us or who have been seized with inspiration, if you'd like to ask a question to our very special guest, the inimitable Michael Enright, You can do so by pressing *3 on your phone, and you will be connected to an operator. And don't worry, you will still be able to hear this discussion while you are waiting in line. So please *3 to put your questions to Michael. Now, Michael, you mentioned high schools, you mentioned community colleges. We have a question from Betty in Twinbo, Alberta. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And she'd like to ask about what CBC can do to attract our youth. Betty, the line is yours. Please put your question to Michael.
Thank you, Michael, for this wonderful opportunity. I want to just say quickly that the CBC has been an integral part of my life since 1964. So my question to you is, I feel that it is now more important than ever to keep our Canadian values and stay away from growing Trumpism. Do you think CBC, when forced by government to cut costs, can still maintain programs to help keep and build our national unity and attract our youth? Thank you.
No, thank you. When I was going to school, when I was in elementary school, CBC Radio had what's called a schools program, and you could listen on the radio to something put out by CBC, and it got me interested. What is this thing called the CBC? I would love to get into grade schools and talk to the young people, young boys and girls, about media literacy and the importance of public broadcasting. CBC Radio got out of children's programming many years ago, and we ceded it to television. And if you've ever watched CBC television kids programming, it is, I would argue, the best in the world. And they do a fantastic job. And you see these little kids, I see them in the halls when they come in to be on the show, 5-6 year old kids wandering around the CBC building, which is terrific, asking questions, and they are interested and they are there. I know that we did a lot of, on the Sunday edition, we did a lot of public forums from university campuses. And the idea that we're all an old farts network like me is not true. There's young college students, young people coming out to hear us, to criticize us, to get involved, and I think that's the future. I mean, they are the future, not only of the country, but of public broadcasting and the CBC. I'd love to see more involvement with schools. We used to run tours. I don't know if we still do. We certainly can't during the pandemic, but if you get them early enough, as the Jesuits would say, you can have them forever. Now, when I was a teenager, I didn't listen to CBC. I listened to Chum to get rock and roll, and get Elvis, and that was the whole point of having a radio. But then you grow into it. You come to it. It becomes almost like a family affair. And when Don Britton, the late Don Britton, a fabulous documentary maker for the National Film Board, made a documentary about CBC Radio, he called it The Family. And you can't have a family without young people, and we need them, and we need to get out and not entice them, but to show them what it is that we do that can connect with their lives. And we can do it too.
Yeah, that's encouraging and heartening. I mean, I will say that friends of Canadian broadcasting, often we go out and people, we have a meeting somewhere and on a Tuesday night, and people ask, where are the young people? I say, well, if you've got, a test tomorrow or kids ready to go to school, it's difficult to come to a meeting on Tuesday. But when they do come to us, they really do love the CBC. I met a young woman who works at a brewery in Toronto recently, who was telling me how the CBC has really helped her get through the pandemic, and she's rediscovered all sorts of programming and digital services. So there is a lot to discover there. We do have actually two more questions about youth. Kareem online asks what guidance you would give to radio and journalism students. But on the telephone, we have Carol Goff from Hamilton, Ontario. And Carol would like to ask what advice you have for teachers about the future of public broadcasting. So, Carol, the line is yours. What's your question for Michael?
Thank you so much. Michael, it's a privilege to have a chance to talk with you.
Oh, thank you.
My question is kind of two parts, because what I'm asking first is, I wonder, do you remember talking with Teresa Goff, who years back did a piece about her dad who had a stroke when he was 48 years of age, and Steve is my husband, and Teresa did an article with you called In So Many Words.
Oh, God, yes, I do remember. Yes.
There we are. Well, that as my husband, he was so fluent at that time. He's less so now, but so fluent in printing because he had very, very few words, has very few words.
Yeah.
And he would say that it opened doors. And we had a privilege of, through United States and Canada, talking to people about aphasia. He told his story in printed words, and I was just his sidekick. We still do presentations. We actually have one at University of Waterloo tomorrow by Zoom type. So my question then, yes, you understand, you remember that one. My question now is, because Teresa has gone on and she's now living in Ontario and teaching at Durham College. She's in media journalism, and she has some young, bright people who are in media. What advice would you give her for Canadian journalism and the direction it should go here in Canada?
First of all, I don't like giving advice to anybody, but in terms of journalism teaching, I would say thank God you're doing what you're doing, because we really need it. Teaching is hard enough. Teaching journalism and media is extraordinarily difficult. The young people I see coming into the business now are, first of all, they're much smarter than I ever was. I mean, I'm a high school dropout and didn't get to university. And I find these young people are more energetic and more intelligent. However, I find that their concerns, legitimate though they are, about getting a job tends to override their ambitions. Nobody went into journalism for the money. You went into it because you wanted to do something. You wanted to learn something. You wanted to provide people with some understanding of their world. And it's getting harder and harder and harder for young people to find that niche in journalism these days. I'm very unhappy about the course of journalism, of the way it seems to be going. I don't like the idea of celebrity journalists. I think that has done a lot of damage to the profession, and it's not a profession; it's a craft, it's a trade. I think I'm treading on dangerous ground here when I talk about when journalists become celebrities. I don't even like the term journalist. I consider myself a reporter. I think in terms of advice, it's important to tell these young men and women to look to their own interest, to look at what they want to do. What is it that drives them to become reporters? Why do they not want to go into a different line of work, become a doctor or an engineer or a psychologist? Focus on what your interest is, and then find a way to make that interest palatable to the people who hire journalists. One of the best ways is to get out of this country, to go abroad with a tape recorder and a cell phone and travel Europe, Asia, whatever, and freelance. Freelancing does often pay off in terms of full-time employment. The other thing I would say is that writing is the most important element in all of this, that the word is king or queen. Focus on writing. Focus on telling a story, like the story of Mr. Goff and the stroke. We live in an era where the narrative drives our humanity. We want a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we want it told to us in a descriptive and inventive and intimate way. As I said, it's very hard to teach journalism. I don't know. I have a very good friend who's been teaching journalism for many years, and he expresses frustrations all the time. But you're doing God's work, or at least the CBC's work.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to all of our callers. We have just under 10 minutes left, and so I'd like to see if we can get in two more questions, and then I may have a final question for you, Michael. So I'd ask, please, that you keep your questions brief so that we can hear as much as we can from Michael. The next question speaks to what Michael just said about celebrity journalists. I think that's a very interesting thread. I'd like to go to Ron McAllister from Toronto.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Michael, for your time and effort that you've put in over the years for CBC. It's a rich and a valuable legacy you've left. I'm wondering what you think of the new management effort to instill a policy. It's called Tandem. And its use is to bring in advertising disguised as news. In other words, paid content to increase commercial dollars. Do you believe that that's exploiting the reputation of the CBC News and the current affairs? Because it does kind of go to the heart of the matter, is that CBC has always been a public institution, and we've always been able to trust it because it's been public. But when you bring in the private dollar, then you're getting a slant that confuses the public. And if you're using CBC talking heads, then there could be a confusion as to what's news and what's fake news. And to me, that seems to be a huge problem, particularly as we've seen in the United States, where people can't even trust basic news. Everything has become fiction.
First of all, this idea of paid news has been around forever. In my early print days, it was called an advertorial, or it was called a reader ad. Pardon me. No, I don't think it's a good idea, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it stretches. It's beyond the mandate. It's beyond what we were set up to do in 1936 and 37. Our mandate is to inform, enlighten, and entertain, and I haven't memorized this, but it's to forge a national identity, which is hard enough. And I think by the idea of paid reader ads or paid content creates a distortion of that mandate. And I think that's a bad thing. We are starved for money. As Daniel was talking earlier about how much money Canadians pay for CBC and all its services every year. It is peanuts compared to other countries. Rather than focus on something like this, I think we should be focusing on getting governments to understand we cannot continue with a beggar's bowl and trying to do all the things that we do. It is just impossible. We should have stable we should have 5-year funding. Because we're a crown corporation, we can't go into the market. We can't borrow, and we should be able to do that. I think I'll go back to the early 1970s, involving a situation with Esquire magazine and Xerox. Xerox decided to pay a reporter thousands of dollars to write about America, and it was sponsored content. E.B. White, one of my heroes, the essayist for the New Yorker, wrote a scalding essay about why this was a bad idea. Xerox, expressing shock and alarm, killed the whole project and apologized to the American public and the Esquire reader for even contemplating it. I credit management for putting what they call a pause on this while it's being examined. Again, I think that to analyze it and to look at it again is important. But I think there are other things we can do in terms of revenue. I would like to see commercial-free radio and television, and I think the government has to realize that. The Paul Martin cuts in the late 90s destroyed much of what was CBC radio, nearly killed the regions and local. And we can't exist like this. I can understand the impulse by senior management to raise funds, but this is, in my mind, very much the wrong way to go about it.
Thanks for that, Michael, and thanks as well for the question. I'd like to say that this is a very live issue. We've had a lot of questions about it. There was an op-ed by Tony Berman in the Toronto Star, a former senior CBC journalist, also opposing the Tandem Initiative. And if you're listening and if you would like to let the CBC board know that you oppose this direction, there's something you can do. The board is meeting on Wednesday and Thursday of this coming week, and we have a petition on our website at friends.ca. You can head on over there, click the button, and sign our secure form, and we will deliver that to the chair of the board and to CBC management in advance of the meeting on Wednesday and Thursday. So please head over to friends.ca if you oppose the Tandem Initiative, because I agree we need to find another way. We have just a couple of minutes left. And so, Michael, thank you so much, and thanks to all of our callers from across the country for calling in, for listening, and for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. One last question for you, Michael, in the few minutes we have left. And it's a question that's too big for the time that we have, but alas, I'm sure you'll manage to give an answer that fits the time allotted. The CBC seems to be constantly in a perilous state, constantly precarious, constantly scrambling for dollars to keep itself going. What's it going to take for the CBC to be its best self? You talked about the renewal that was taking place in the early days. What do you think the CBC needs to do to be the service that all Canadians deserve?
First of all, we have to establish the centrality, the importance of public broadcasting. If you look at places like Poland and Hungary and Turkey and all these tin pot dictatorships, you see that the first place that the usurpers attack is the public radio network, public radio system. I think we have to stick to what we're doing, improving on it every day, which we do, and we have to persuade Canadians that it is in their interest that they have a lively, well-financed, effective public broadcasting entity in this country. We got to hold the country together through CBC and other elements, but the importance of it, it's never been, in my mind, never been more important than it is in these years.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I think we will close on that note. I did say earlier in the program that you are not here as a representative of the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and I'd like to reiterate it. But I am, and so I would like to encourage our listeners today. Michael talks about persuading Canadians about the importance of public broadcasting, but more importantly, I believe, is also to show politicians and decision makers about just how many Canadians care so deeply about the CBC and its role in keeping us informed, ensuring that we have the latest health advice, local health advice in the current moment, but also bringing us the arts, bringing us stories from across the country. We have our own country. It is independent. It's different up here. And if we can't connect to each other and tell our own stories, the country disappears. The CBC is like the railway, but in our minds as opposed to in the economy. And so its importance, I believe, is really central to our existence as a country. So I would encourage you all to please, if you haven't already, head over to friends.ca to join our mailing list, stay in touch. The way that we make this case is by standing up and being counted and letting the politicians know what we feel, because if we don't tell them, they'll never find out. And so I want to thank you for your support of our organization and of our movement. And most importantly, I would like to thank Michael for his very generous contribution of his time and for answering these questions so generously and so honestly and sincerely. And Michael, we're just a little bit over time, but unlike radio, we have a bit more grace. I have to ask you, what's next? You mentioned that you have a podcast. We've had a ton of questions coming in about what's happening next. In about a minute or less, can you tell us what's on tap for you rather?
Well, graciously, CBC Radio Management has offered me a 1-hour time slot to be determined to do a program that will probably go to air sometime in the early spring. I really miss radio, and I want to get back to it. And this is a very exciting venture. It's a new challenge. My God, I'm hitting every cliche in the world. But it's very exciting. And I hope to reconnect with the listeners sometime in the spring.
Well, thank you, Michael. And, cliches exist for a reason. So we'll forgive you on this occasion and on future occasions. And we look forward to hearing your new venture whenever it comes out. If you let me know, I'll make sure that our supporters are aware of it and can tune in, because we also miss you on the radio. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of our supporters, on behalf of everyone who called in, and personally for spending another Sunday morning with us.
Thank you, Dan.
It's a real fixture of our homes and our lives, and it's a real privilege to have had this time with you.
Thank you, sir. It's great fun.
Okay. All right. Thanks to you, and thanks to everyone else. We'll hope to be able to do this again soon. So again, please head over to friends.ca and sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already. And with that, I will say good afternoon. And to those of you further west, good morning. Thank you very much.